Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Town of Scarborough Ordinance Committee meeting. It's Tuesday, July 13th at 4 p.m. We do have a hard stop tonight at 5:20 p.m. There will be a workshop for the Town Council at 5:30. So we will have to work through this agenda quickly. I will say that there's a lot of very interesting items on tonight's agenda. Please don't expect much for action. We really wanted this to be more of an opening and a forum for some good discussions around some of these topics. Just keep that in mind as we go through it. Love to hear your feedback tonight. All right. First item here is a roll call. April Seither.
Here.
Jean Marie Caterina.
Here.
Nick McGee is here. I'm sure that is all of us. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the June 13th, 2023 meeting?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. I'm sure that's unanimous. Item number 4, discussion and possible action around short-term rentals.
Here or here?
Wherever you're most comfortable. And there's a microphone that works.
And Liam, do you have the presentation pulled up for me? All right, so in your packet, I included just some information from Granicus about short-term rentals and some different products that are out there, sort of to get you thinking about them. So the purpose of this presentation that I want to go through with you is just to get you thinking about goals. You can go to the next slide, Liam. I'm scared because Nick's gone really fast, so I got to keep up, right? So this will get you started thinking about short-term rentals. We're going to go through what are they, so a little bit about defining them, goal discussion, and then how to regulate them, impacts, and then next steps. So the short-term rental basically is a residential unit. It can be your home, it can be a garage apartment, it can be an accessory dwelling unit, but it's the short-term part is less than 30 days. And so there's a lot of different hosting options around those. So you can be a hosted rental where you actually are on site and you're renting your ADU. You can be a non-hosted rental and so on. So there's some different types. These don't include hotels, bed and breakfast, all those uses. So these really are just residential units. The types, and we have these great examples around us. You'll see licensing or registration. So registration just means basically you come in, you can be on an annual basis, you can come up with your own concept for that, but we know where you are. And licenses, on the other hand, is very similar, but there may only be a certain amount given each year. So next. And so if you decide it is the right option and you want to look at it, the first step is to really define the goals of the ordinance. And depending on what communities you look at, what part of the country, there's a lot of goals, right? And so I think in your packet, if you went through it, there's 275 identified short-term rentals just at first blush that are showing up on social media and outlets to rent them. So is it really about protecting your neighborhoods? Is it about getting more? 275 is not enough. So we want to increase tourism. Is it making sure that they're safe? Is it making sure that the town is getting that revenue? There is some revenue potential from permitting. So there's quite a few things to really look at when you want to start this ordinance discussion. It's a little bit different from some of the ordinance discussions we've had before, I think. So some of the decisions that you would want to think about is where and when you want to do it. Is it an ordinance you would want to apply town-wide, or is it just specific parts of the community? You can do zoning districts, you can do specific areas, an overlay area. You can do, again, like I mentioned, you can have an open amount or you can limit the amount each year. Is it seasonal? There's a lot of different things to talk about. And then one that's important not to forget is, do you want to also allow the non-house sort of things like tents and RVs? We see that coming up in a lot of communities. And so who? And that's another big question. Is it just primary owners who can do it, or is it a corporation? Okay, do you care? So those are some things, and our neighbors have different iterations of those districts, those different things defined. And then how, so the first step, if you want to do the short-term rental ordinance, we have to figure out, again, the goals, and then are we looking at registration only or licensing? inspections. Inspections is a huge component to this, and it's probably the one that worries me the most from the administrative. It's a big burden on staff and time. And so that's something really to keep in mind when considering this ordinance. And then fees, violations. What do you do if you don't register it? The violation and the penalties really have to mean something if you want to enforce it. And then an administration plan. And so this is just a brain dump of potential considerations. You know, you have to think about like trash and animals and snow removal and all sorts of things, making sure that people have paid their taxes before they actually get a short-term rental. So there's a lot of different considerations to think about. And then the next one, and this is the town staff involved. It is not just the code enforcement departments, town clerk, assessing, public safety, code enforcement, GIS, and others. So it's going to really be a wide-reaching ordinance and project. Cost and benefits implementation is huge. We will need help to do that. We don't have that data available. And there's places and companies that can provide that and help us with that, but that's something really to keep in mind. Initial inspections and registration, again, making sure that we have the staff power to do that. And then ongoing tracking, annual inspections, annual registration, licensing, fees, protecting neighborhoods. So these are some of those pros and cons, right? So you have to consider all of those. And then the next steps that I would suggest is, if this is something you would like to pursue, really defining the goals. So if the goals are to promote tourism versus protect neighborhoods, those look different. Your ordinance looks different. And so I think you have to approach it from that place first. And then the data collection to find out what we're dealing with and what we have out there. And again, there's companies that can help us with that. And then some sort of committee or public process, draft ordinance, implementation plan, so on, kind of the status quo. But those are just some things that I want you to know about and consider thinking about for the short-term rental ordinance. Next. That was fast, right?
It was really fast.
Super fast.
You gave me confidence that we could solve all of this in the next 10 minutes.
Do this.
No, I appreciate it. That's a very thorough breakdown of all of the work that would have to go into this. So again, back to my initial announcement, we don't expect anything hard or fast coming out of
Yep.
anything we talked about today. I think that we need to gauge the temperature of the community and of the council on various aspects of something like this. And the discussion has to start somewhere. So welcome to today. So thank you. With that, if you don't have anything else to present on that topic, I will open it up to the public for comments. Ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. State your names and record and just let us know how you're feeling about short-term rentals.
No problem. My name's Dave Green. I live at 135 Beach Ridge Road. 2 years ago, I had 2 brand new houses built across from me in the hayfield, and that's just great. That was my cousin's prerogative to sell them. And then all of a sudden, about 18 months ago, who I think is my neighbors, I haven't seen them for months. Okay, so this cat's out of the bag. I hope you understand that. And this is a short-term rental, and it's been rented to all kinds of people who have not been a problem. I'm not here complaining, but I can see some potential issues, okay? When you put a whole construction crew in there renting your entire 4-bedroom house, they put a whole lot of guys and a whole lot of trucks, and they like to leave there at 6 in the morning. I live in the RF zone, and I expect that, okay? But I can see a whole lot of potential problems for you if you don't address this fairly quickly, because it's already going on. Don't think it ain't. Okay. And this is way up on the other end of town. It's not just down here at the beach for people that want a weekly rental to go to the beach. These people are renting it to put their help in there to stay for some job around here. Okay. Which I don't have an issue with, and they haven't been a problem. When they are, I'll let you know. Okay, but this cat's out of the bag. Please address it, because I can see you're gonna have a lot of issues somewhere down the road here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Appreciate it.
How you doing? Thank you. My name is Scott Townsend. I live at 2 Acorn Lane. I'm also a local real estate professional, and my wife and I own Coastal Maine Properties. We do business as HigginsBeachMaine.com, and we're involved in some capacity or another with 100 rentals, many of those short-term. So just a couple questions that I had to start is, I guess, specific to Higgins Beach and some of the beach communities. Have there been a lot of complaints or any complaints regarding rentals in the beach communities? And I don't know if you guys answer, if this is just more food for thought, things to think about. And my other thing is, are we trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist? Rentals have been, especially short-term rentals, have been a part of the fabric of this community going back as far as I can remember. In fact, my brief history is my grandmother and grandfather were introduced by friends in somewhere in the 1940s to Higgins Beach, and our family has been weekly renters until 1983 when we purchased a property there. And I've now been a member of this community for over 25 years, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity had we not come here as weekly renters vacationing. The other thing to consider is the information and the stats that were brought to your attention. That company that can help you come up with the ordinances, I'm sure there's a fee for that. What is that fee? They probably gave a pretty good sales pitch in order to be up here today. And then also, as a realtor, my job is to protect the homeownership rights of the population. So, that's one thing to consider is if somebody purchased a property and they're choosing to rent it out, whether it's to offset the taxes, whether it to be they're prepping it and getting it ready for an elderly parent that'll live there someday or a child that may need to come back. If they bought a property in this town with that intention under the guidelines that they could do that, and then the rules are changed, I personally am not an advocate of that. So those are just a few things to consider. Some other things as you do your research, the number of short-term rentals that were brought to the attention, I believe that the number, that might be the number excluding the beach communities. But if you include the beach communities, I think it's higher than that. And that's really about it for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend.
Hi, I'm Sue Hamill, and I live on Bay Street in Pine Point. And you've already heard from me on this. I sent a pretty long, detailed email. Please, sooner is better. Do this. It really needs to be done before more and more houses are converted to short-term rentals. It is happening all around us. That area where I grew up in Pine Point, it used to be a neighborhood down toward Bailey's Lobster Pound. That was a neighborhood. People lived there year round. They were modest, ordinary houses. And that neighborhood is gone. That area in the winter is vacant. It's decimated. There's no main plates in the driveways. And if you walk around in the summertime, you'll see cars parked every which way. You might have 7 cars parked because it's 2 families and they all had, 4 cars for one family, 3 for the other. And it was originally a driveway for 2. So there's just so many issues. I go down there on a weekend or on a Saturday night and see for yourself what it's like. When Kenny Bonk addressed this, they knew that Goose Rocks was different, was always, always had summer rentals, weekly rentals. And so they handled that completely differently. One thing about the enforcement, Old Orchard has built kind of their local economy on summer rentals. And they have a very streamlined system. When you first register, you get your inspection. And so that's where they pick up no egress window and all that kind of stuff. And after that, it's a paperwork process. No one's going to come in and inspect to make sure you have a working smoke detector year after year. That's a waste of everyone's time. So, but please, the sooner we get on this, the better. And thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Any other public comments? Anyone online, Liam? So with that, I'll close public comments for this topic and kick it over to the council members to discuss.
Well, I can start. Having been on ordinance for a number of years, during my various terms here on council, this has sort of come up. And then we were kind of looking at it like, well, we're a beach community. We're used to weekly rentals. We're used to, you know, people coming and going and whatever. But I have noticed in the last, I'm going to say 5 years at least, there does seem to be more of a conversion to what I call the true short-term rental. I don't consider a week rental short-term. To me, short-term is I can go on VRBO or whatever they are out there, Airbnb or whatnot, and sign up for 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights. That to me is short-term rental. And I have a concern with that because of in residential areas, in particular, you know, the turnover, and houses to me weren't meant for that. I also am a realtor. I'm looking at Scott. And yes, private property rights are very important. And I work in my professional position to make sure people's private property rights are preserved. But there is a fine balance between private property rights and the public interest. So I want to make sure we do a real good deep dive in looking at this issue. And I really thank our planner for bringing forward, you know, a lot of things for us to think about with this, because different towns have approached this differently between licensing at the beginning, registration, limits in certain areas and whatnot. So I want to make sure that we're looking at that in a broad-based manner before we dive in. Another thing that came up is cost of, you know, how do you track who's got these units? I know GP Cog has developed a program. They've got Paul Johnson, who used to be the chair of this committee, has worked with someone that April Seifer knows on a program that would be available for the first year for free and at a discount after that. But again, that's down the line if we decide, you know, we want to do anything. And finally, people know that I am extremely concerned about the lack of affordable and workforce housing in this town. And we're doing better on that. But when you've got particularly non-occupant owners coming in here, buying up property and turning them into short-term rentals, that's affecting the ability of just the normal average Jane or Joe to be able to afford a house or afford a rental. So those are some of the reasons I'm interested in. Finally, we really need to get a handle on this right now. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Jean Marie. April?
Yep. So Jean Marie alluded to this, and I'll just do my kind of disclosure right out the gate. My husband did develop the software for GPCog that they are considering using and that is potentially available. And so from that perspective, like I just so the public knows, I guess, that my husband is the developer on that software. Getting back to the topic of the ordinance and the urgency and the need for us to develop something like this, I couldn't agree more. I think that, you know, to the public comments point, this is happening in our community now. Jean Marie, I was going to ask if there was any kind of legislative, if you've heard anything from this at the state level, like are we anticipating?
Yeah, it comes up every year, but home rule always says, you know, the towns, municipalities, at least that's the way it is right now.
Sure. And that's probably what I would have anticipated as an answer, you know, but that's also a piece of it. You know, I think we pride ourselves on being ahead of state legislature that comes down a lot of times. And so having something in place that is specific to our needs as a community and as a town is really important to me. And, you know, thank you, Autumn, for giving us that comprehensive list of all the things that we need to consider as we align and kind of carry out this discussion, because there's a big balancing act to do here, for sure.
Thanks, April. For what it's worth, my thoughts on this, and full disclosure, I do own a property management company. We do not do short-term rentals, are mainly work in condominiums, so not part of my portfolio. But I do appreciate the comments from both sides, because I do understand that we do have a beach community here, and a lot of those ownerships and traditional families for a long time have used their beach adjacent homes for additional income and vacationers. And of course, they're always welcome. I do also understand that it can be unsettling to have a short-term Airbnb style home in the middle of a neighborhood and not knowing who is coming in on different days or nights into your neighborhoods and into your family's lives, for better or for worse. So I understand both. Where I think I want to go with it for now, and looking to you two to see if we could help steer some of this for Autumn, is I think Old Orchard Beach probably has, my guess is probably one of the most experience with something like this, being another beach community, has a program in place. And I got to believe maybe that's a good starting point to see and try to maybe even understand from their officials what they think works well, hear from their public safety to hear how it impacts or doesn't impact their current ordinance, impacts of different government services of their ordinance. I don't know, I think that'd be a good place just to examine and see what works, what doesn't work, what's different, what's not different.
I would add South Portland,
And
just
South
because they've got a slightly different spin to it, but they have the Willie Beach area that was traditionally beach rentals and whatever, and they're more recent, I think, and what they've done. So I'd be interested in knowing more about what they are.
What do you think? Start there
That's fine.
and just see their ordinances and maybe go through the pros and cons and impacts, if we can try to put something like that together. I think, also for me personally, I think one of the first steps is try to get our arms around what's
Yeah.
actually happening
Yeah.
here in town. And we don't know. I mean, we've all heard the stories about the Airbnb, a tent in a backyard is being advertised as Airbnb.
Yeah.
Is this really going on? Is it really a problem? Is it? So better understanding it. So I'm no intent of being hasty with this, but I do believe there is a little bit of urgency based on what we're seeing. But also we should do this carefully, and maybe it's a measured approach in different levels. We'll start basic and then work our way up to the more nitty gritty. So.
That
Mm.
sounds very reasonable. I think,
Yeah.
As we get into the nitty gritty, we do need to really think about the cost, and in terms of if, inspections are necessary and all of these things, like, I'm just thinking about our staff and their time, and whether an ordinance like this is something that we can even take on with our current staffing, or whether this is something that we need to have a bigger conversation about at the budget level, in terms of planning for this. So I'm definitely thinking about it from that.
Sure.
From that.
And
stance too.
given, the new state regs around ADUs too,
Mhm.
we wanna, because I'd like to get ahead of that to some degree too, so.
There's
Anyway.
Bud, Autumn?
I've got it.
All right.
And I would encourage the public to, send us emails, your
Yeah,
experiences.
that would be
If you
helpful.
own one, what would, how it benefits you, or your knowledge of how it benefits people. And if you've got any thoughts or know of any other towns, I mean, I know Portland was way involved. I don't even want to go down that road right now. But, I personally be interested in hearing more too, so.
See you in August,
No,
September-ish.
September-ish.
September.
Yeah, I was gonna say September's fine.
Sorry, August, I think is getting packed on other fronts, isn't it? So September, we'll hopefully have some sort of compare, contrast, review options between.
That's not a problem. I've actually started that. So that's how, there's a
You don't have
lot
to
of
tell us
really,
that. You can just be like,
oh,
look at the immense amount of work I did.
okay, so yeah.
Thanks, Autumn.
Sure.
All right. Our next item tonight is discussion and possible request to look into home-based businesses to allow for shellfish sales.
Mhm.
And who is kicking this one?
This one's me as well. This one came before us for a request from a local commercial shellfish harvester. They wanted to sell products at their home. And so in the memo, we have several uses that sort of play around this idea, but they don't specifically address it. There is a method right now. You can do shellfish, seafood as a home occupation. You have to get a special exception through the ZBA. And that's what this particular person actually did. But the conversation arose, should we actually add seafood, shellfish sales to these definitions and expand those a little bit? We have home occupation, and we have performance standards, and those speak to fishermen, lobstermen, and shellfish harvesters, but they have to do the special exception. Then we have farm stands, and farm stands are permitted in the RF district, but you can't do it. So in red, we could add, I think if you go, yeah, farm stands. So farm stands have performance standards, but they only allow your typical agricultural services. And then we have a use called accessory agricultural services, which is allowed in all of your residential districts. So that's where you can sell your extra flowers and whatnot. But you don't, we don't permit fishing use. So the next slide, there's a couple, keep going. There's some options. If it's something that you consider and think we should address, we can. There's some pretty simple fixes. If there is also a mechanism to keep it as is, and you can do it through the ZBA process. So if that's where you think you would like to keep it, that's acceptable as well. I just wanted to, it's been brought up a couple of times, and so it was worthy of just a discussion to get some input on.
Thank you. Anyone from the public would like to comment on this issue, please approach the podium.
You don't know me, I'll got something to say.
Still got 3 minutes, Mr. Green. I'm a fast learner.
I'll be short and sweet. I don't really need your microphone, but I'd like to take one exception with Councilor Sitha's comment that you made, that you try to keep up with the state. I believe in your packet, you got a copy of the state statutes that say any licensed shellfish harvester can sell the stuff from their house. Now, I beg to differ with you, because that's been on state law books for a long time. Okay? So I don't know where you try to keep up. You haven't kept up at all. Okay? And it's being done currently, sold out of people's houses. Now, I was down here last night with my grandson on his zoning board of appeals. He had to pay $250 to get in front of that board. And now you people want to take up changing it so that he can do it. I think that's great. But you're going to give him his $250 back? A lot of hard dug clams to earn, okay? So I hope you people will get onto the right bandwagon here, okay? Because I can only compare it to the Constitution of the United States. It says I have a right to keep and bear firearms. Do you think the town of Scarborough can tell me I can't? That's my right. Now, the state of Maine says he has a right to sell his clams at his residential property. Don't talk about farm stands or anything else. So please, let's get in line with what the state says you need to do. I'm sick of hearing that the town of Scarborough got to micromanage everything. Because you know what? I'll go back to what Rocky Rivera said about 30 years ago. It's easier in this town to ask forgiveness than it is to ask permission. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Green. And Councilor Seidler, just so you are clear, Mr. Green, I think she was referring to the short-term rentals on the state level, not the shellfish. Is that correct?
It's okay.
Any other public comments? Okay, Liam, nothing online? Okay, we'll close public comments. Jim?
Yeah, the young man who is affected by this called me, regarding the situation. And I have to say, I live in the RF zone and we sell honey from a stand in front of our house. Done it for a number of years and I was shocked to find out that as part of a farm stand, so to speak, you can't sell shellfish. Now, I absolutely understand that it needs to be kept cold. You can't just leave clams sitting around and they rot or whatever over time will poison somebody, I guess. I don't know. But that being said, I totally support adding this use. Given, do we have to add, though, make sure it's refrigerated? I don't know, because I was looking at the agricultural ones and I guess I can sell and I'm looking at Autumn for this. So if I had a cow, well, not cows, cattle that I then killed and put their meat, I can put their meat out and sell it from my door, right? But I can't, my clams that I've harvested. So I think that's silly. That's my opinion. Welcome anyone else's.
April?
I'm in favor of whatever the most streamlined change is to allow for this. Whichever makes the most sense, whether we add it to farm stands or accessory agricultural use. I agree. I think this is just one of those things that I certainly didn't know that this wasn't allowed. And from a practical standpoint, I can't imagine why it would be any different than any other, product for consumption that people are allowed to sell. So.
I think for what it's worth, my 2 cents would be I would want to see some form of review being performed, just because with shellfish, you have, like you said, refrigeration issues, or you may have odor issues, which we've just been dealing with here. You may have traffic issues inside of a neighborhood, depending on where they live. Also, are we going to try to tie a commercial license to their home sale? Like, does that matter whether their commercial license is held here in Scarborough in order to sell out of your house in Scarborough? Yes. Or so those are questions that I don't know which of these categories it needs to follow through to give us that kind of review or that ability to consider. If it's the farm stand one and we look at all that.
And maybe
Fine.
a combination of the two. I'll work with Brian Longstaff, our zoning administrator. He's been dealing with these for quite some time. And I think we can probably address the in-farm stand and the commercial, because you have to have two different things.
Okay.
So, but we'll bring forward something that adds some performance standards for refrigeration and everything.
Yeah, I think that would be wise. And again, I don't think anyone here is opposed to seeing this happen. It's just how do we best deal with it?
Sure.
Right. So.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. And next item on today's discussion is, if it would be okay with members of this committee, I would like actually to switch items 6 and 7 around, just because I'm sure the chief and Mr. Greenleaf here have places to be and do not want to sit here for all of this. Would anyone be opposed to having them go next? All right, I'll entertain a motion to move item 7 up a spot.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor? All right, so. You thought you had one more? Yes, you're up. So our next item will now be the discussion and possible action on request for a sex offender registry ordinance. Again, highlighting what I had said earlier. This is really meant to be informative, I think, not just for us here as counselors, but for you as the public and of course, the public safety department, which I'm sure they'd love to hear some feedback before we begin trying to draft whatever it is we may or may not draft. Thank you, Chief.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Holmquist, the Chief of Police. I've brought with me tonight Officer Eric Greenleaf, who is tasked with many things within our department. His primary job is as our community resource officer. He also substitutes as a school resource officer, DARE instructor. And when he's not in the schools and doing community things, he fills in working patrol as well. if he doesn't have enough to do, he's also tasked with registering our sex offenders who reside here in town. And the reason why we're here tonight is and I'll have Officer Greenleaf provide an overview on this, but it came to our attention directly to Officer Greenleaf that we had a registered sex offender who was residing in a camper on a property here in town and went a number of days without making notification to the Scarborough Police Department. And I'll have Eric take it over from here.
So received a phone call from some residents who were very good at gathering intelligence online. Had camera footage outside their houses just to prove that there was this gentleman there. You know, when you move to the town of Scarborough under the cover of darkness and you don't notify the local authorities, who's going to know who's living here? And so I got a little bit of heat at first, not knowing that this person was here. And I had to explain that, you know, this is what the law says. You have to notify me within 24 hours. And you have 5 days to get paperwork to the state of Maine. Once I did my investigation, which is corresponding with the state of Maine, I have to get documents certified. I had to go to, luckily the court was very close by to get some documents for prosecuting him that the court would need. We were able to, within, you know, that 24-hour period of the phone calls, summons him, and with the assistance of code enforcement and myself, this gentleman was removed from the property. But then that opened up a whole nother can of worms about the discussion about an ordinance, which is why we're here.
And basically what we're looking at is Officer Greenleaf has been doing the sex offender registry notifications for a long time. And it's been the practice of our department to not overuse the notification and to save the notifications for those most egregious offenders considered by the state to be tier 3 offenders. And a tier 3 offense is a class A or B felony. So your most egregious offenders would be reserved for that notification process. And in speaking with Officer Greenleaf, he indicated that it's been past practice that when someone was released from the Department of Corrections and took up residency here in town, that a notification or a discussion about doing a notification would be made. For the most part, all tier 3s were notified. We made notification to the public. Tier 2s, not so much. And tier 1s, your lower end sex offenses were not considered. To be clear, the state of Maine does not require any municipality, any police department to make notification to their citizens. So we reserved it for the tier 3, and it's something that we've had discussions with Councillor McGee about whether we open that up to expand into tier 2 as well. The only concern that we have is, you know, the number of sex offenders that we do have in town, and possibly the number that we could have in town. And the fact that I have an officer who's dedicated to do this, among other things, is a concern of mine. So currently we do have 19 tier 3 offenders, either living in town or working in town, or have a mailing address in town. And that's out of 35 offenders that are registered through the state registry.
And to add to that, the registration in Augusta updates their database basically nightly. So that could fluctuate. In addition to residents that come to Maine to visit, that see me, to have paperwork documented and signed. So it's not an exact number, but we're in a ballpark.
Another consideration that was brought up, and actually Officer Greenleaf just attended training recently and brought back information about state law that allows the town to enact an ordinance that would restrict the residency of sex offenders within 750 feet of any public or private elementary, middle, or secondary school, any state-owned park, athletic field, or recreational facility where children are the primary users. And that expands into other types of parks within the town. And the only caveat to this is that I want to clarify is that if prior to the enactment of such ordinance, if we do have a sex offender who lives next to a ball field or something, they are grandfathered for that. They will not be forced to move out of that neighborhood. So part of the challenge here is for us to come up with a ordinance proposal that makes sense for all involved. And part of that is meeting with the concerned community members that brought this to light and getting their feedback. For what I've been told, they're very well versed in what some other communities are doing. And I'm looking forward to hearing from them. And also making sure that this ordinance makes sense for everyone involved. We do not want to over notify folks to send folks into alarm. But for those tier 3 people that have earned all of the scrutiny that is about to come their way, we definitely want to take that into consideration.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. Officer Greenlee, thank you too. At this time, we'll open it up for public comment for anyone that wants to weigh in on this.
Richard, Maple Avenue. I strongly urge the committee to act quickly on this ordinance. When we became knowledge of the situation, I was somewhat appalled to find out this individual was 150 feet from a school bus stop. The people in the neighborhood got together. They threw a lot of stuff around. I drafted or copied from the various communities around us a draft ordinance, mainly to get a conversation going with the group. And what we submitted, and I believe the council got a copy of what we had come up with, is not strong enough. If I had my way, they wouldn't leave their property. But the group had different opinions, and with our interpretation of what the law is, we submitted, but none of us were happy with what we submitted. We have asked to have a meeting with the state elected officials from the town to try to strengthen the ordinance. The biggest concerns from the group was communication. Nobody knew this individual was in the area. Some of them walked through the neighborhood during the early morning hours, and they were really shocked the number of kids that were standing by themselves at the different locations where the bus would pick them up. Some were K3, some were middle school. Back when I was in middle school, I didn't want my parents around. And this stop that I'm talking about in the morning, there's anywhere from 10 to 15 kids that get on the bus. That's really concerning to all of us. If we had got noticed, then the whole community could be looking out for the children. And that's the biggest concern that the group has, is looking out for the children, especially going to school and coming home from school. So I strongly urge that we act quickly to get this done. I don't think we're gonna get it done before school starts, but sometime in the fall, have this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. Any other members of the public? Anyone online? All right, I'll close public comment. Chief. Officer Randy. As far as the state goes, the 750-foot requirement notice, has it been determined whether that can be exceeded? Is that the recommended? Is it the minimum? Do you know, or should we do some research about the notification areas?
It states, and I'm reading right out of the statute, a municipality may prohibit residents by a sex offender up to a maximum distance of 750 feet surrounding the real property comprising of the said locations.
Thank you. And then as far as, I believe it, and if I misheard you, please correct me. There's currently no requirement to notify anyone. However, Scarborough has been on tier 3 offenders doing this notification process.
Yes.
How much time does it take your officers to do a process? Is it 2 days, depending on the density of a neighborhood? Is it varies, just rough ballpark?
You want to add the fallout from doing the notification in addition to it?
I'm sure there's a ton of
It
follow
would
up.
be a
Right?
week.
Yeah.
With phone calls and emails.
So every
After-
notification costs you about a week's worth of work.
After initial flyering.
Is it, can you, what is the notification? Is it an email? Is it a
So when it,
formal?
just as an example, the
For
last time I
email.
did it was several years ago, and it was a gentleman that was convicted in a gross sexual assault out of Gray, and he had been in prison for a long time and made national news with his conviction. We notified basically everybody in the whole section of Scarborough. And I had, I don't know how many guys and volunteers, our VIPs were handing out flyers. And it took me after a couple of days of flying, the rest of the week to field phone calls because you can't give a lot of specifics on the flyering. So there's a lot of questions about that. And you had to answer those questions over and over and over again, which is understandable, but it's time consuming. So.
What is the, so it doesn't sound like there's been a standard range for notifications in terms of proximity to a person's residence. Correct?
I think it's been done by case basis
Sure.
over the years.
Is that something that is reflected in other towns' ordinances? Like, is there a standard amount of radius or space, distance from?
Can't exceed 750.
No, that's for allowing them to live there.
You're saying notification.
Yeah, I'm saying for
With
notification.
electronic stuff, I mean, I think you have the ability to just go town-wide, right? I mean, that would be,
Yeah, so
Right. And then we're just trying to apply common sense to who needs to be notified
Mm.
and how as well. We had brought up in conversation whether or not social media should be a tool with this. And yeah, if you want to generally get that information out quickly to a large audience, yes, but how effective is it?
Right.
If we have a police officer going to a residence who lives within, I'm just saying 500 feet or so from where a sex offender resides, then that's that personal contact, and we may be able to answer some questions with the information that we do have or not, but at least it's a lot more personal to me
Yeah.
to be able to do that rather than social media, which will also generate some back and forth conversation that may not be helpful.
in addition, also, if they have been out of prison, served their probation time, they live like we are allowed to travel. If they have the probation standards, that's going to dictate where they can live and not live. A lot of our local hotels, when COVID hit, people were living there, and I had taken upon myself.
Hmm.
A lot of them have corporate regulations that don't allow for that because we're families present.
Right.
And what do we do with that situation? So that was another dilemma. And then we have our unhoused population.
Right.
Questions? Any
well,
other questions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sitting here back in my deep dark past. I was a child protective services worker specialized in sexual abuse victims. So I met a lot of these characters. Many of them are reoffenders, and high risk. So I mean, I'm frankly, I was a little surprised we don't have a stronger ordinance than we do. And I would like to see us come up with something that's strong. But we're gonna have to get legal input into it too, because there is that balance between, again, personal freedoms and where's the limit, and vigilantism that can arise from a sexual offender moving into an area and all of that. But the number one thing is we need to protect our children from these folks who, for whatever their reasons, God love them, but yeah, it's not a good situation. So I'd be very supportive of anything that we can do, to strengthen our ordinances around, particularly these tier 3. The tier 3, I get it, and some of the tier 2 I get too. Tier 1, those,
I think that's a question we're gonna have to also try to.
yeah, I
a
mean, we're
specific
gonna get
answer.
some legal, we'll have to get
Well,
some
yeah,
legal.
where's
Right.
tier 2 draw the line? And I know they
Right.
just changed the definition too, didn't they? The state legislature. I think they just added another subset to tier
Yeah.
2. They made
It's a
it,
fluid
fluid.
process.
right? So
Yes.
how do we protect, the children? How do we protect the police officers for making sure
Right.
they're doing what they need to do? How do we protect the community? And do this quickly, so they have the tools they need.
Right.
My thoughts, Liam, I know. Would it be helpful if, whether it's Officer Greenleaf, myself and you take a first go at a pass and incorporate some of the language we received possibly from the community and adjacent communities? Would you be willing and open to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there obviously are some model ordinances that we can look to see how that applies and fits in Scarborough, trying to find the balance between demands on law enforcement while having a sound ordinance. So, and there's obviously some urgency behind it and energy behind it. So I think working offline and bringing something back for actual comment and review for the next meeting is probably appropriate.
Sure. And then, and just out of curiosity, is there another resource we should be talking to about locations in town that may or may not end up on a list? Do we create a list of these locations where you're prohibited from living?
I think GIS be suitable to plot all that out. Is it Micah?
One town, I think so, they did that with GIS. Was it?
At a radius.
Yeah.
Agree.
So I don't know if we can have maybe task Liam to help bring in some resource for that as well.
Sure, we can absolutely look at that
Okay.
radius issue.
And then I'd like to have a goal, and please, looking to you two to tell me if this is too aggressive. If we brought back in August, is that moving a little too fast for a draft language review? Or do you think we can have a draft language review, another conversation?
Hey, August is fine by us. We'll get it done. So.
I'd like to see, personally, I'd like to see it move sooner rather than later, because you have school coming up
Correct.
and whatever, so.
Our next meeting is August, right? So. Yes, April, anything? Appreciate both of your times today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, next item tonight is the discussion of possible action on seasonal parking located at Scarborough Beach. Autumn.
Thank you. This is an item that came before planning board a couple of years ago. The Sprague Corporation requested an unimproved grass parking lot for seasonal overflow parking in Scarborough State Park. They did go through the ZBA process to get approval to park offsite. And then the next step was planning board. The planning board, we took them forward through a sketch plan recently. We don't have ordinances that speak to temporary parking lots. So parking lots have to be improved. They have to have gravel subbase. They have to be able to withstand wear and tear. And they also have to adhere to our stormwater standards. And the planning board was uncomfortable with knowing what our standards are and what the applicants had proposed. So the applicants asked if there was any opportunity to allow some sort of seasonal parking lot, which it could maintain. Staff has some concerns with creating this overarching seasonal parking lot use. There could be a way to create a process, perhaps somewhat similar. We just did a seasonal tent permit process, maybe doing something a little bit harder to get with some specific criteria, very limited in scope. Liam, if you go to the next, this is really it, right? So it's safety, it's fire trucks being able to get on site. Fire trucks don't enter grass sites. Pedestrian access on busy roads, entryways needs to be improved, and then some sort of monitoring and a limit. We'd also want to make sure that we have a cap of how often this sort of thing would be used. I think the applicants have proposed 30. I think that's an appropriate amount, 30 days, because other than that, you're going to really create, it's no longer a grass lot, it's an impervious lot. And then we are an MS4 community and we get into stormwater issues and so on and so on. And so I don't have any proposals before you. I just wanted to have the discussion if this is something you wanted staff to look at, or if the answer is just no, the seasonal parking lot thing is not permitted. I do know that they used it yesterday and they're using it right now for parking. So it's definitely a seasonal thing. It's definitely a need when we have sunshiny days, which I was promised more when I moved to Maine. But but I think we want to be real careful. We don't want to create this big parking lot thing that we can use in other places. So we want to keep it very narrow in scope if staff moved forward with something on it.
Thank you, Autumn. And just for the record, I did receive an email from the Prouts Neck Improvement Association from their president saying that the association itself is supportive of what's being proposed of a temporary with caps on the size of number of spaces and the number of days in use. So sounds like from that aspect of the community, they seem supportive of this idea. I am going to open this up to public comment for anyone else that's here. If they'd like to speak, please approach the podium. Okay, great. Let's start with one online. We'll mix it up.
Matt, you should be able to speak.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Just briefly, I represent the Prouts Neck Improvement Association, and you just mentioned the email you got from Jeremy Winterstreet. I just wanted to briefly expand on that to note that as I understand it, the provision in the ordinance that's really at issue here, which is 11K, was adopted in January of this year. And when we were looking at these issues last year, it wasn't in the ordinance. And what we think would be very appropriate is for you to adopt an exception essentially to that provision in the ordinance, considering this very appropriate circumstance. We believe that Sprague has done a very good job in addressing the concerns of the neighborhood and all the residents that use this area, both safety concerns, environmental concerns. And we think that this is an appropriate use of this property and to address the parking issue. And it can be done in a way that addresses that list that you just looked at and just chatted about just a second ago, in terms of stormwater and in terms of particularly visual impact on the area. This is a neighborhood, it's a residential area, and we think it's really appropriate to have a grass lot without lighting, without paving. And we think it can be done in a way that is protective of the safety of both the safety officers for the town as well as for the environment. So, and we think it could be done with limitations that are appropriate so that you wouldn't be expanded beyond this type of use. So for example, you could limit it to a recreational use for overflow parking, no more than 30 days a year, have to be reported to the code enforcement officer when those uses are done so that the code enforcement officer can track them. And, no more than 115 spaces, those types of things can be put in there, and we'd be happy to work with you and the town generally on coming up with language if that's appropriate. So with that, I just want to note that we really do support the notion of putting this in the ordinance, so it's an option. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. The other online comment.
Mark, you should be able to speak.
Great. Thank you, everybody. My name is Mark Bergeron. I'm with TRC Environmental. We're an environmental and engineering company based in Portland, Augusta, and Bath, Maine. And like Matt, we've also been supporting the Prouts Neck Improvement Association. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the technical aspects of kind of grassed parking. It's a good development tool. We talk about tools in the toolbox to use. We think it's the right use to have in this particular case, but it can also be used in other cases like retail associations, larger developments where it's kind of unsure if you're going to need hardscaped, paved parking all the time, 365 days a year, overflow parking, seasonal parking, those sorts of things. Reducing impervious areas and allowing softer scapes that still can be used for parking and travel. There are technological options for grass parking. There's plastic matting, there's different types of other surfaces and treatments that again allow for certainly emergency equipment and those sort of things. So just briefly, we would support some sort of ordinance. We'd be happy to review and provide any input if needed, and allowing some sort of discretion of the town engineering staff, the public works, and the fire department about for each individual development case what specifics might be required in these instances. I think for the Scarborough Beach State Park proposal, just a seasonal use during the summertime with a limited number of days that I've been talking about, we think it's an appropriate use. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other public comments?
Hi, I'm Marvin Gates. I live at 423 Black Point Road. Certainly a neighbor. I've been to all of the meetings, neighbor of the parking lot, proposed and otherwise. I've been, since this was brought to the planning board's attention and to the zoning board of appeals attention, I've attended all of those meetings. Thankfully, haven't commented at all of those, but have been active in my understanding of the situation. Full disclosure, I'm a member of the Prouts Neck Improvement Association and support their position as well. And in fact, it is my action that I think brought this to all of this attention. The parking lot, in point of fact, has been taking place for many, many, many years, either at 2 doors away, the Harmon family acreage, or my next door neighbor, the Gray family acreage, when the Harmons decided that they no longer wanted to have this overflow parking. When it came to my next door neighbor, my abutting neighbor, the noise and some direct concern of mine and my wife's about parking next door caused me to dig into the zoning ordinance. And I found that there was no authority that existed in the town for this going on, and it's been going on for decades. I contacted then the town planner and the code enforcement officer, and without putting anybody on the spot, they realized what was going on shouldn't be going on, and an abutting neighbor opposing it was enough to make it stop. And my only comment here is the town obviously already approves this. if even by lack of enforcement of something that shouldn't have been going on. So if that makes sense, I think I'll stop there and say thank you.
Thanks, Marvin.
Hello, I'm Greg Wolfert. I live at 409 Black Point Road, but I also run Scarborough Beach State Park. And long story short, this parking across the street has been going on since the 70s. And it started by the neighbors doing it themselves. And then the state of Maine leased the gray lot and the Harmon's lot for parking, which was 280 spaces, somewhere in that vicinity. Plus, the original owner of Scarborough Beach, Gladys Jordan, parked 70 cars in her yard. So when you add up that total, what we're asking for is just a small sliver, because we've gone down to 115 at this lot. We only use it usually around 25 days during the summer. And it's usually would be weekends, but when you only have 4 days of summer so far, sometimes it happens in the week. We want to keep it grass. We don't want to take down the big trees. There's some 60-year-old oak trees there. We want to try to preserve it because it's only used really mid-June till Labor Day, and then that's it. And we want to make it look like it's just a field. And that's what we want. And we just realized, you know, and I look at it, because we've always looked at Herd Park and they have the overflow, which is a grass lot, and we think it can be the same thing. And we've said before that we can do improvements on it in the off season if it needs it. And if the code enforcement officer came down and said, look, it's just been trampled, you got to back off, then we'd back off. We wouldn't use it. And keeping a limit number of days, I think it's a good thing. So we just need it does alleviate the traffic problem on the road. We've done a lot of things to speed that up so that we don't have as much traffic by allowing certain people to get in the park at 8 a.m. so that we don't have the stacking on the side of the road going all the way back up to the firehouse, which is a mile away. And we found things, my staff does maintain the road, trying to keep it safe so that we have traffic going both ways. So I think this is a good thing. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments then? All right, I'll close public comments. Jean-Marie, April.
Yeah, I think I agree. I know as growing up around this area, we go to Jordan's Beach, as it were, all the time when I was a kid. And the overflow parking was across the street, Mrs. Jordan's yard and different yards and whatnot. So I'm in favor of, supporting whatever makes the best sense for this area. And I like the idea of keeping it the grass, not cutting down the trees, make it, it's only for a couple of months or whatever we want to do, very time limited. But I would support, something coming forward, definitely.
I'll just say, I appreciate the public comment around this to give it some context, because I really could not imagine why this was necessarily a need that, I just didn't get it. And I live here and, obviously I've probably driven by all those cars parked on the side in that dirt lot or grass lot many times and just never really given it consideration. So obviously I'm in favor of something coming forward because I think we do need to have some concrete rules around this. And again, I'm always making sure that it's something that's enforceable, that code enforcement, with recommendation from them as to what the parameters should be. And so I would definitely be in support of something coming forward so that we can align on what the rules should be.
Autumn, what do you need from us as far as direction on this? It seems like we have kind of a proposal in place. Do you need help with?
I think we'll probably look at it as an expansion of the special event, sort of looking at it from that perspective, so it doesn't become a parking lot, but it's more about an event. And then that allows us to limit it for time frame and days. So I would propose bringing something back to you in August
Okay,
with that sort of thing in mind.
sure.
Does that work?
Sounds great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. We are getting close to quitting time, just so we know. Try to get this last item in. Discussion and possible action on proposed administrative changes to chapter 1018, the marijuana ordinance. Liam. Chief.
Thank you, Counselor McGee. This is just a brief change we're hoping to sneak in for the items that have otherwise been approved out of ordinance to go to council next week. Those were the enforcement process with some cleanup of the language, as well as the revised odor mitigation standards. This is just a small change under section 8. Right now, the licenses that are approved are on a rolling 12-month basis. It just makes it administratively burdensome for staff to keep track of all those rolling dates and make sure they get in for their renewal. So we're proposing to adopt a process fairly consistent with other town licenses. This is really modeled after the innkeeper's license, which is all licenses are due or run through the August 31st of each year. The one caveat is if the new licenses are fall in July or August, they're through the following August. But this will just allow us to have a better handle on it from an administrative standpoint, but that's the only change.
Thanks, Liam. Any public comment on this topic? Nothing online? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. For what it's worth, this makes sense. We do it with all the other licenses we hand out, have them do it all at the same time of year. And then, of course, just like any other license, it can be plucked out and set aside for council review if there are issues. So I'm fully supportive. Anyone else have anything else to add?
No.
I'll entertain a motion to adopt the presented section, revised section 8A.
So moved.
Second?
Discussion. All in favor? Show that is unanimous. So we'll see that move to council.
Thank you.
And then one more item of housekeeping this evening is our next meeting, which apparently is going to be a very beefy agenda. So what do you fine ladies have available? August 10th, for those at home, was not working for 2 of the 3 counselors. So I was gonna say, how does the 24th look?
Yeah, it's wide open.
That's fine.
August 24th will be our next ordinance meeting. All right. With that, I do not have any other business on this agenda. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion?
Excuse me.
All in favor? So this is adjourned at 5:17 PM.
Good.